Hi, I'm Katy Bergen, and welcome to Beer Hour, the Kansas City Star Facebook Live show in which I drink a beer each week with fascinating people in the Kansas City area. Today, our guest is Kansas Secretary of State Kris Kobach. Kris Kobach is a former Overland Park City Councilman and chairman of the Kansas Republican Party. He's advised President Donald Trump during the 2016 election, and he announced today that he is running to become governor of Kansas in 2018. Kris, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
What are you drinking? You're drinking the Dunkel, correct?
I'm drinking the Dunkel, which is the dark beer.
The dark beer.
Yeah.
We're at Casey Beer Company in the Waldo neighborhood. I'm drinking the Pilsner. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you.
Do you like beer?
I do like beer.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's I like dark beer especially. As you can see.
So dark beers are your go-to drink. I have an important question for you. We're going to get the important ones. I think this says a lot about a person.
Okay.
When was the first time you drank a beer? Where were you? Do you remember what the beer was?
Oh, I don't. So I can tell you it was in Topeka.
Okay.
I grew up in Topeka.
Okay.
And back then, that was before the drinking age was 21. So I was in high school.
You would have been 18. Maybe.
I might have been 18. I can't remember.
Right.
And it was at, there were a bunch of, way back then there were some bars on College Hill, which isn't really a hill, but it's around Washburn University. It was probably somewhere down there.
Is it just a strip of bars and restaurants?
Yeah, there's some bars and restaurants. Nowadays it's more, back then it was kind of old and beat up, that area. I mean, they were nice, but anyway, now it's more, gentrified and hip, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you remember what kind of beer it would have been?
No. Probably Budweiser or Miller or something like that. I don't even think, was Bud Light in existence then? I don't know.
I wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know. Probably a typical American draft beer.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you saved me a question today. We'll just get right to it.
Yeah.
You announced this morning that you intend to run for governor. When we booked this show 2 weeks ago, that announcement had not been made.
Correct.
Did you know then that you were going to run?
Yes. I made that decision over the past few months, and I mean, I was leaning toward it before. I had gotten two offers, to work for the Trump administration, and so some people may have seen some of the photos where I was meeting with then President-elect Trump, and I still have been meeting with President Trump since then. It was a really tough choice. I mean, that's a big deal, getting to be invited by the president to work for his administration. But finally decided that no, I'd want to stay in Kansas and consider running for governor.
So you were invited and you turned them down to stay here?
Yeah. There were two offers, one to work in the White House and one to work in the Department of Homeland Security.
And so talk a little bit more about why that decision was hard and what ultimately made you want to stay. Was it because of you knew you'd run for governor, or was it something else?
A lot of things. Okay, so living in Kansas, or more broadly Kansas City for your audience. I mean, I love it here, and there are not many other places in America that would be comparable. And for me, this is the number one place to live. I love being in Kansas. So, and I have 5 kids, and we love where we live. And so, to move to Washington would have been a sacrifice. And it would have been worth it if I felt like I could, the position I had would be one where I could just really move the ball, make a big difference, and that my being in that position would be really important for the country and how much we could do. And on the other hand, if I stayed, it'd be a lot easier for my family. And I started seeing more and more that with what's going on in Topeka, I'm not really happy with what's going on in Topeka, that I could make a much bigger difference in Kansas than I could working in the Trump administration. So I mean, part of it was, we love it here. We want to stay here, and the other part of it was I think I can actually do more and make a bigger difference here.
Sure. So I'm not a political reporter. I'm more of a casual reader, observer of Kansas politics. I associate you so strongly with as I'm sure many people do, with the issues of illegal immigration and voter fraud. What other issues are important to you? And we don't have enough beer to go into all of them, so let's be brief about this part. But just tell us what else is important to you.
Right, so you know about the illegal immigration, which I've worked on for a long time, and the voter fraud, which is part of the job of Secretary of State. A whole bunch of things. I'm pro-life. I'm very pro-gun. I'm a gun enthusiast. I hunt all the time. Those are big issues for me as well. Cutting taxes is a big thing for me. I feel like some people say, oh, well, you cut taxes or you raise taxes depending on the effect it'll have on the economy. Yeah, you do that, but you also do it because in my view, it's just wrong for the government to take more and more money. It's not like the government asks you and says, hey, Katie, would you like to give us more money next year because we feel like we'd like to do X, Y, and Z with it? No, the government takes it from you. And so I think it's immoral in some sense for the government to keep on taking more and more. In Kansas, we just had a massive tax hike 2 years ago in sales taxes. And many people who live near the state line have seen that in their pocketbook. And now we just had the largest income tax hike in state history on Tuesday. So that's an issue I care deeply about. Another issue I care about is you could put it under the broad rubric of corruption or government abuse, and that is when people stay in office for 40 years. We've got one legislator on the other party who's been Anthony Hensley's his name. He's the Senate Minority Leader. He took office when Gerald Ford was president, and I was 8 years old. He's still in office. Gerald Ford died 11 years ago, and I'm 51. So, I think we need term limits in Kansas, not only for the legislature, but for all members of the statewide executive branch. Right now, only the governor is term limited in Kansas. Missouri has term limits. I think it's worked out fine. Maybe some state legislators who lost their jobs in the legislature wouldn't agree, but I think we need that in Kansas.
So I think in saying this, I probably won't be surprising you. I've had the most diverse group of reactions to telling people that you were going to be on my show. Maybe that speaks a little bit to maybe how sometimes your politics have been polarizing. You have people who really dislike your politics and thus dislike you. You have people who really dislike your politics and made a point of telling me that you are a really nice person. And then obviously you have people who feel like you champion things that are important to them.
Right.
And so I have a point for all this. I actually was reading a profile my colleague Brian Lowry wrote about you in 2015. And he interviewed your wife, and she talked a little bit about what it's like for your family when you experience personal attacks based on your politics. Yeah. And she said, I try to remember that people who criticize him, they don't know him at all, they know a caricature of him. What do you think the caricature of you is that people who are maybe not your biggest fans have of you?
It's really, it's interesting because there are two caricatures out there. One's really good and one's really bad. And I'm just a regular guy who wants to get some things done, and I have some views and some principles that I think should be applied in government. The negative caricature is really horrible. I mean, they make it sound like I'm hateful. They make it sound like I'm racist. They say really horrible, false things about me, and I just when they first started doing that, which was when I first started making a difference on maybe the illegal immigration issue. That's usually people who favor more open borders. They oftentimes will accuse people who are on the other side, you don't like illegal immigration because you're a racist. Well, that's such a cop-out. I mean, come on, give me a real argument. But initially when people started saying that, I really, really took it personally. I was like, how can you say that about me? But, I just have realized now that they're going to make that caricature of me, of a really evil person. And I think it's unfortunate in politics that happens because there's some really good people who are serving in government on both sides of the aisle. And when those good people are described in just exaggerated terms that attack them personally, I just think, why do we do that? I mean, let's disagree on the issues, but let's not get personal.
Can you see how that happens, though? Like, if you support a travel ban that affects countries with populations that are predominantly Muslim, or you support law enforcement stopping people and asking about their immigration status just based on the idea of suspicion, like, do you at least see how people come to those conclusions and how they bring race into it?
I can see this. I can see that if a person was out there who was a true racist, that person might say, having a more restrictive immigration policy might make a racist happy. But that doesn't mean that having secure borders is racist. It just means that racist favors it because of his weird agenda. But look, we have to have respect for the rule of law. It keeps us safe in terms of crime. It keeps us safe in terms of terrorism. And it keeps us safe in terms of Americans who are trying to put food on the table, and they're competing against unfair illegal labor. So I can see how someone might go there, but that's an illogical conclusion. Just because a racist might think something, that doesn't mean that other people who share the view that our borders are secure and our nation's sovereignty has meaning and we have to enforce the law, that doesn't make everybody a racist who wants to enforce our laws. And then, of course, there's the other caricature, which people on the right have, some of them have of me, of being sort of superhuman, like, oh, he's going to be able to change the world, and I'd like to think that I can, but I hope that I will get close to doing what they expect of me. But so that's fine too. I like that caricature. The superhero one is great. Yeah. But it's kind of funny in politics. We deal in these cartoon figures.
Well, so the world is so clear, I think, on your views on illegal immigration, just because you have been sharing them for so long. I talk to people who cover you more specifically than certainly I do, and there was some disagreement over what's your origin story in terms of how you began championing, fighting against illegal immigration. When did that start? And so I just figured I'd ask you, what's the origin story for that?
So I first got interested in the issue as a law student at Yale Law School, and that was back in the 90s. And then as a law professor, continued to be interested. I didn't start teaching immigration law as a course at UMKC, just not too far from here, until after I came back from the Justice Department. I was at the Justice Department from right before 9/11 until the middle of 2003. But in terms of what sort of pushed me on my career path, where I said, okay, this is going to be a cause that I'm going to try to make some progress on, that was probably 9/11. And you hear lots of politicians say, oh, 9/11 was my inspiration. I think more than half the time that's baloney. But in my case, it's actually true, because at the time of 9/11, I was working in the Justice Department, and the Attorney General had already given me the job of being his chief immigration law advisor. So 9/11 happens. All 19 of the terrorists came into the country legally. 5 of the 19 terrorists became illegally here, most of them by overstaying their visas, so they were illegal aliens at the time of the terrorist attack. And 4 of the 5 were stopped by local law enforcement for traffic violations. And if the police officer had known that they were illegally in the country, the police officer could have made an arrest right then and could have stopped that terrorist from being on the plane when the planes took off on September 11th. And get this, 3 of those 4 terrorists who could have been stopped and were having a conversation with a police officer, 3 of those 4 were pilots. So you think about that. It was a huge missed opportunity. And that realization shaped what I did at the Justice Department on how we try to keep track of high-risk individuals who are in the United States. And then it shaped my work subsequently with state legislation I was running, like Arizona, where police had these opportunities where they might be talking to a person illegally in the country who's a terrorist, or a person who's illegally in the country who's a criminal, and they could have made the arrest. And that missed opportunity of such tragic proportions has kind of shaped a lot of what I've done since then. So 9/11 really did kind of put me on that trajectory.
So that sounds, obviously, if we could stop terrorists, that would be great, right?
Yeah.
But I think the challenge and the concern that a lot of people have with policies or laws that purport to do that is, how do you weigh that against the fact that it might lead to racial profiling, or it might lead to targeting people, and that even though you have really good intentions, you would still impact a group of people because you would be trying to specify who has those bad intentions or not.
This is one of the greatest puzzles of immigration policy. We are a very generous country when it comes to our refugees admissions. We are very generous as far as allowing people to come here on temporary visas to work or for business or pleasure. But you've got to screen people. You've got to find, the 9/11 terrorists, they all came on, almost all of them came on temporary visas for pleasure, and a couple of them came on student visas. So how do we screen them? And that's one of the reasons why I support the executive order of President Trump, the travel ban, is to temporarily halt certain high-risk countries and then say, okay, we'll start it up again. Remember, it's not a permanent halt, it's just a temporary one, and we'll start it up again with new screening procedures. Now, that's the tough part. How do you screen them? Part of it has to be in the questioning, right? You have to ask questions that someone who has ill intent would have to make a bald-faced lie to answer the question. And it can't just be one question, do you intend to come here and blow up a building or hurt people? It has to be a series of questions and see where the person's answers are. And that's really complicated, but it's not impossible. I mean, law enforcement has been asking questions of criminal suspects for more than 100 years. And there are certain ways of asking questions where you can elicit or get closer to the truth. And I think that series of questions has to be asked by U.S. immigration officers. And look, we just face this risk. We want to be an open country that welcomes people from all parts of the world to come visit and some to come stay. But we have to screen them. I mean, we can't expose ourselves to terrorism. And, these terrorist attacks in Europe remind us Europe has gone way too far in exposing its people to terrorist attack and just sort of having an open door. Well, we have an open door, but our door it closes and it opens, it closes, and we are careful about who we let in. So we need to be even more careful.
Let's switch gears. You talk a lot about your love for hunting. Who taught you to shoot originally?
My dad. Mm-hmm. I started hunting quail in Kansas when I was 11 years old, and now I hunt deer with a bow and arrow. I have been teaching my girls to hunt.
I heard a story that they have to kill a deer, bag a deer, is that what you say? Before they're 7?
Tag a deer.
Tag a deer? Yeah.
Yeah, at age 7. So, we've been fortunate enough to have some nice hunting land in Kansas. And so my girls, who are real outdoors women, 13, 11, 7, 5, 2, they don't have to, but the objective is if they want to, they can tag their first deer. They can shoot their first deer at age 7. We eat the deer. In fact, if you look in our freezer, there's tons of venison. And so Molly, our 7-year-old, she shot her first deer this year. In Kansas, if you have a deer tag, both the parent and the child, and you're with the child when they shoot, they can shoot the first deer, and it's really cool. So she shot her deer, and the first question was, "Daddy, when can we start have a dinner?" Because she was really eager to put food on the table for the family. And so her choice was venison pasta, venison spaghetti.
I've never had venison pasta. I can say that
it's really good, and it's low fat. It's very good protein.
Gotcha.
So anyway, I've enjoyed sort of passing on the hunting tradition to my kids, and hopefully they'll keep doing it for the rest of their life. If not, that's okay too.
That's okay.
Yeah.
You grew up in Topeka, you said.
Yeah.
You were educated at Harvard and Oxford and Yale.
Correct.
When you left the Midwest, was that the first time you had really lived when you first went to undergrad?
Lived somewhere else, yeah.
What did you learn about the way the world works or living outside of the Midwest that you still utilize today?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. It was more of a culture shock moving from Kansas to Boston, the Boston area, when I went to Harvard, than it was moving from the United States to England.
Really? Why is that?
Yeah, I think that living in the Midwest, there's just a way of life, there's a friendliness about people, there's just a demeanor and an attitude that we have. It's pretty different than saying if you're living in New York City or Boston. There's just a little more intensity. People aren't quite as friendly. I mean, there's some great people in Boston, but I mean...
I was born in Massachusetts.
Okay,
just so you know.
Okay, so will you tell me? Would you agree that people are more laid back?
Edges, yeah.
No, and I actually love Boston. It's a great city, but I don't think I want to live there.
Okay.
Having grown up in Kansas, I don't know. I think people are friendlier. You can disagree with me on that.
I might not go there. I might not go down. I might not like.
We don't want to talk about Royals and Red Sox or anything like that.
No, definitely not.
So that was one thing. But you were asking me about, what was the original question?
Well, what did you learn about, like what you said, what the way people operate, the way the world is outside of the Midwest that maybe helps you as a politician or helped you when you would go on and advise Trump in D.C. or? Yeah,
a couple of things. One thing in England that really struck me and actually did have a direct effect on what I did in the Justice Department when I was there was I lived in England for 4 years when I was getting my graduate degree. And when I was there as a foreign student, I had to check in with the British authorities whenever I changed my address. And I think it might have even been on either an annual basis or whatever. But I had to go down to the police station, tell them where I was living, what I was doing. And I was thinking, wow, they're really keeping track of me. They want to know exactly what I'm doing while I'm here on the student visa. And we don't do that in the United States. And so after 9/11, When I was working what's called the National Security Entry-Exit Registration System, we were trying to keep track of higher risk people. Not everybody, just the higher risk categories. And I brought my experience in England to bear and said, hey, look, there's nothing wrong with asking a visitor who has the privilege of living in your country, hey, just check in with us every year, or check in with us whenever you move. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Some people in the more open borders community were like, oh, how dare you? How dare you make people come in and be questioned? Well, it's not that outrageous to ask someone who's visiting our country, hey, we just want to know what you're doing. Are you still working here? Are you still going to school? Where are you living? Okay, thanks. See you later. So that was one thing I learned. Another thing I learned is that there are really different attitudes about certain subjects. For example, we were talking about hunting. Mm-hmm. In Europe, especially, and in England, it's just like, they think it's crazy that you own guns. And I said, oh yeah, come visit me in Kansas. We'll go shooting, and you have guns at home. And you have handguns too. People are there's just this attitude that guns are taboo, whereas here in the Midwest and in other parts of the country too, and in New England too, maybe not in Boston proper, but upstate New England.
Right.
Yeah, people have guns. It's no big deal. It's part of our American heritage. So that was kind of interesting to see the really dramatic difference.
Did you see any pros of a society where guns are taboo? I mean, did you ever think about why one is better than the other?
I didn't see the benefit of disarming your population. I mean, it was kind of quaint. You see the British police officers, the bobbies, walking around with their big hats and no gun and a billy club at their side. But we just saw, what happened in London when you have a disarmed police force. I think it took them 8 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, before the police officers were able to shoot the terrorists. Look, I guarantee that near the London Bridge, there are lots of police officers. So I imagine that there were quite a few there who weren't armed. I just don't think that makes sense, especially in this day and age of terrorism, to have a police force that does not have firearms. I mean, maybe 50 years ago, that was perfect for London. Not today.
Let's talk a little bit about voter fraud.
Okay.
And convince me, I guess, this is my question as a millennial, why this is a problem in Kansas, why I should pay attention to it. How does voter fraud that you say is happening in Kansas, how does that really affect me?
Okay, well, it affects you if you vote or if you care about who wins an election, right? If you're not a voter, then you might not worry about voter fraud. But every time you have a close election, if you have a handful of votes that are fraudulently cast, they could swing the election, or they could cancel out your legitimate vote. So we had this happen in Kansas City, not on the Kansas side, but on the Missouri side in 2010. In North Kansas City, there was a primary between Rizzo and Royster, really a well-documented case, and the Star wrote about it too. And the allegations by the polling judges were that someone had been bringing in Somali nationals and getting them registered prior to the election, and then was bringing them to the polling place and coaching them to vote for one of the two candidates. And at the end of the day, that candidate won by one vote. And there was subsequent investigations, and they ultimately concluded that in addition to it's unknown how many foreigners who were not U.S. citizens at the time voted. There were also some of his relatives who voted outside of their district for him. And so even, I believe, the Kansas City Star acknowledged in one of the editorials that, yes, that election was stolen. So, look, as an elected official, I want to know that if I win fair and square. I want to know that if I lose, I lost fair and square. And I think as voters, we just want to know, hey, this is a close election. There wasn't an illegal vote cast that canceled out my vote. Every time a non-citizen votes, it effectively cancels out of the vote of a citizen. And if the margin is 10,000 votes, you might say that it didn't change anything. But if the margin is 10 votes or one vote, then it does change it.
For some, I think on this issue specifically, you're already kind of their champion. But I would imagine that your real challenge when you're running is convincing what I feel is probably a significant group of people, and it seems like election experts agree that this is really not a rampant problem. There may be individual cases, but it's not as widespread as maybe you or your supporters would suggest. So I really don't want to get into the validity of that because we don't have time. More so, my question is, how will you convince people that voter fraud is as rampant and as an issue as it has been suggested?
I think people just need the numbers, you know?
Sure.
So one of the things we've done in court, because we're fighting the ACLU on this issue of our proof of citizenship law in Kansas, which I introduced when I became Secretary of State, we have shown to the court that there are 128 specific non-citizens we can identify who either registered before our law went into effect or who tried to register, most of them subsequent to the law. And many of them voted. And you might say, okay, 125. Well, is that a big number or a small number? I don't know. It depends how you look at it. I think it's a substantial number. Then in addition to those, we had an expert do some sampling of our voter rolls. And so when you sample, you pick a number of people who are on the voter rolls, you call them to see if they're citizens or not. You hope that they're answering honestly. And then you extrapolate from the number who said they were non-citizens to the entire voter rolls. And anyway, he did that, and he extrapolated that it could be over 18,000 non-citizens on the Kansas voter rolls. Is that a substantial number? I think it is. And so those are the kind of numbers that I'd like to see the Presidential Commission on voter fraud, which I've been named to head. I'd like to see that on a national level. Let's just throw some numbers out there. I mean, valid numbers, and find the statistics we can find, put them on the table, and let people draw their own conclusions. I think one of the problems about this issue is people may take a position or form an opinion without having hard facts. So let's put the hard facts out there. I think the facts show that, at least in Kansas, it's enough of a problem that we should do something about it. And we'll see what the numbers are nationally.
So when you have a bad day and you get pushed back on your policies, or people say things like they're rooted in fact, or we want to see the evidence, who do you call? Who is your greatest Topeka friend?
My greatest Topeka friend?
Yeah, your bestie in Topeka.
Oh, if I have a bad...
Outside of your family.
I was going to say, I probably talk to the first person to hear about it would be my wife. I don't know. I mean, there's some legislators who are buddies, but I don't know if I would call them. I usually call my non-political friends, the ones who are not in office, and say, you won't believe what they did, or you won't hear about this. So, there's a couple friends from church that I might call. One of my people who I seek advice from most often is John Ashcroft. I met him when I first started working for him at the Justice Department, but he's really become sort of a lifelong mentor for me. I just respect him so much, and he's obviously a famous Missourian, and he still lives on his farm in Missouri, and so I keep in regular touch with him all the time.
What did you learn the most from him, would you say?
Oh, so many things.
What's the little Ashcroft thing that's in you that maybe you kind of stole and took along the way with you? Okay,
one is his. This sounds like a canned phrase, but it's not. His deep respect for the rule of law. That, if you are the Attorney General, if you are the Secretary of State, the rule of law is critical. We all have to follow the law, and nobody's above the law. He would use that phrase, rule of law, all the time. Also, I'm a Christian, and he is too. And the way he kind of used his Christian values to shape his decision making and his life, that influenced me a lot too.
So when you're not being a politician, what do you like to do?
I like to hunt. I like to row. I like to spend time with my girls. We do a lot of biking together. Those are my biggest pastimes.
Do you row now? I used to cover rowing, actually.
Oh, really?
In Florida, yeah.
Really? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still row. So now I have a single scull that I row in Topeka on Lake Shawnee. When I was a UMKC law professor, I used to row on the Kansas River or on Wyandotte County Lake with the Kansas City Rowing Club. So I'm in the old man division now.
They have masters
They
rowing,
do, yeah,
right?
they have masters rowing, yeah, sure. So
have you competed
I have.
in that? Have
in
you
fact,
done well?
I have. I haven't recently, but I haven't done as much competition. I've just been too busy. But yeah, when I was 35, I and a doctor from here in Kansas City, we won the national championship in the Masters men's double.
Okay, all right.
I used to be really super serious about my rowing. Now,
do you how do you have the time?
Yeah, I don't. When you're serious about it, as you know, you row every single day. You might take one day off. Now, about one day a week, I get out on the water, but I still like to do it. It's just a lot of fun. It's mentally relaxing. As you probably remember from when you covered rowing, it's a very technically difficult sport. People think that rowing is just yanking on an oar and pulling, but it's actually balancing a boat, especially a single scull, is really difficult. Many people may not know this, but a single scull, if you don't hold the oars exactly right, you will tip over. You can't, and if you try to get in a single scull without the oars in,
I've tried this.
you will tip over.
I tried to do it.
You cannot balance it. So it requires incredible concentration on just the act of getting the oars in the water right, and it's a perfect escape because you can't be thinking about the office. You can't be thinking about politics. You can't be thinking about the things that are bothering you when you're rowing a sculling boat. So I like that.
I heard that you're a big U2 fan.
I am.
Have you heard the news that the tour is coming here in September, and will you be there?
I have heard the news. I have seen them in concert twice already. I will probably be there. My wife heard about it before I did, and she said, we're going to go. She's never seen them in concert.
Okay, awesome.
So I will probably be there, but we'll see. September is a big hunting season, too, so we'll see what happens. I got to make a choice. It's going to be tough.
Gotcha. Last question. I know you have someplace you need to be. What are you most excited for this year? What are you looking forward to that's unpolitical related?
It's not politically related. Oh, wow. I'm excited about taking my kids on vacation. I'm excited. I'm always excited about going on a hunt, here or there. I mean, I always have hunting trips planned. What else is happening? We don't have any big landmarks like anniversaries coming up like that. Oh, I'll tell you something else. We're building a new house, and so I'm excited about doing that.
Where is the house?
It's between Kansas City and Topeka. So I was living in Kansas City for the first 5.5 or 6 years of my time as Secretary of State, Kansas City, Kansas. And the commute was just really grinding me down. I mean, just every day back and forth. And so we decided to buy some farmland between Topeka and Kansas City, but really close to both. And so we're going to start building that house very soon.
Do you like being a little isolated because you have such a high-profile job?
I do like my privacy, yeah. So, I get a lot of exposure, whatever. Sometimes protesters have something to say.
Your house is going to be hidden, is what you're saying.
You will not see it from the road.
The address won't be posted.
That's right. Yeah. So no, we're excited about that too.
Gotcha. Well, Kris, thank you so much for joining me. That's it for Beer Hour this week, guys. Join us next week at 4 on Thursday for a special beer-themed episode at Boulevard Brewing.